Humanity's fleet entered the Warzone. First document. The Galactic Council's emergency session had been going on for 14 hours straight. Representatives from 12 different species sat around the crystalline conference table, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony of clicks, whistles, and telepathic static. At the center of the holographic display, a three-dimensional map showed the outer rim territories painted in ominous red. The Vorthak Dominion had claimed another 3 star systems in the past week alone. Admiral Zexahar of the Altarian Navy fluttered his 4 wings nervously as he addressed the assembly. His translator device struggled to convert his rapid chirping into standard galactic. Honored council members, the situation grows more desperate by the solar cycle. The Vorthak war machine shows no signs of slowing down. Our combined fleets have suffered 70% casualties in the last engagement alone. The holographic display shifted to show fleet compositions and battle statistics. Each number that appeared made the assembled representatives sink deeper into despair. The crystalline hegemony had lost their entire outer defense grid. The Aquatic Federation's bioships were being systematically hunted and destroyed. Even the proud warrior clans of the Ursine Confederation had been forced to retreat from their ancestral hunting grounds. Council Speaker Yithara, an ancient being whose jellyfish-like form pulsed with bioluminescent worry, spoke in her melodious tone. The mathematics are clear, fellow beings. At current rates of advancement, the Vorthak will reach the core worlds within 2 standard galactic years. Our military projections show a 97% probability of total galactic conquest. A heavy silence fell over the chamber. The only sound was the gentle humming of the life support systems and the occasional nervous click from one of the insectoid representatives. The Vorthak weren't just another aggressive species seeking territory. They were systematic exterminators who viewed all other forms of life as inferior and worthy only of destruction or enslavement. It was then that Representative Kolnas of the Feline Dominion raised a clawed hand. His golden eyes held a glimmer of something that might have been hope, or perhaps desperation. There is one possibility we have not yet considered: the humans. The reaction was immediate and mixed. Some representatives began chattering excitedly in their native languages, while others made sounds that clearly indicated skepticism. The humans were known throughout the galaxy, but more as curious oddities than as potential military allies. They were the species that had somehow achieved faster-than-light travel using what most civilized races considered impossibly primitive technology. They strapped themselves to controlled explosions and called it propulsion. Admiral Zexhar's wings folded with what might have been amusement. With all due respect, Representative Kolnas, the humans are barely out of their technological infancy. They've only had interstellar capabilities for less than 2 centuries. Their largest vessels are smaller than our escort frigates. Yet, Kolnas continued, his tail swishing with agitation, they are the only species that has never lost a military engagement since joining galactic society. Small conflicts, yes, but their combat record is perfect. More importantly, they are the only species that has actively sought out combat situations rather than avoiding them. Speaker Yithara's form pulsed with consideration. It was true that human behavior patterns were unlike anything in recorded galactic history. Most species, upon achieving interstellar travel, focused on trade, exploration, and cultural exchange. Humans did all of these things, but they also seemed to actively seek out dangerous situations. Their entertainment consisted of fictional scenarios involving conflict and violence. Their sports were often barely controlled combat. Even their exploration missions seemed designed to test the limits of survival. The humans have been monitoring galactic communications, Kolnas continued. They are aware of the Vorthak threat. 3 cycles ago, they requested detailed tactical information about Vorthak fleet compositions and battle strategies. When asked why, they simply said they were curious about the tactical challenges. Representative Silthara of the Aquatic Federation rippled her tentacles in what passed for laughter among her species. You suggest we ask the humans to face a threat that has defeated our combined military might? Their entire space force consists of perhaps 300 vessels at most. I suggest, Kolna said firmly, that we ask the humans to do what humans do best, something unpredictable. The debate continued for several more hours, but eventually, desperation won over skepticism. A formal request for military assistance was transmitted to Earth, along with complete tactical analyses of Vorthak capabilities and detailed star charts of the war zone. The message was marked with the highest priority codes and included an offer of significant technological exchanges and territorial concessions. The human response came back within 6 hours, which was impossibly fast considering the distance involved. It was a simple text message in standard Galactic. Understood. Terra Fleet Command is analyzing the situation. Will respond with action plan within 72 hours. Admiral Sarah Chen, commanding. What the Galactic Council didn't know was that humanity had been preparing for this exact scenario for decades. Human military doctrine was built around a simple principle that most galactic species found incomprehensible. If you want peace, prepare for war. While other species had spent centuries perfecting trade agreements and cultural exchanges, humans had been quietly building something unprecedented. Deep in the Sol system, beyond the orbit of Pluto, lay the outer defense grid. To most galactic observers, it appeared to be a collection of asteroid mining platforms and research stations. In reality, it was the largest military-industrial complex in known space. For 50 years, human engineers had been working in absolute secrecy, developing technologies that other species had deemed impossible or impractical. The human philosophy was simple. If someone could build it, someone else could destroy it. Therefore, build it better, stronger, and with more redundancy than anyone else thought possible. Human ships weren't the largest in the galaxy, but they were over-engineered to a degree that other species considered wasteful. Every system had backups. Every backup had backups. Critical components were often triplicated or even quadruplicated. More importantly, human tactical doctrine was built around assumptions that other species found disturbing. Humans planned for their ships to be damaged. They expected casualties. They designed their strategies around the assumption that everything would go wrong, and then they prepared for it to go worse than that. Other species built fleets to avoid conflict. Humans built fleets to win conflicts. Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the command center of the Terra Defense Station, studying the holographic displays that showed real-time intelligence about the Vorthak advance. At 43, she was young for a fleet commander by galactic standards, but she had earned her position through a combination of tactical brilliance and an almost supernatural ability to predict enemy behavior. Analysis complete, Admiral, reported Commander Jackson Torres, her chief intelligence officer. The Vorthak follow standard pyramid formation tactics with heavy emphasis on overwhelming firepower. Their vessels are approximately 30% larger than our heavy cruisers, but their technology appears to be focused on brute force rather than tactical flexibility. Chen nodded, her dark eyes reflecting the glow of the tactical displays. They're used to fighting enemies who retreat when faced with superior firepower. What's our fleet status, Commander? All battle groups are at full readiness. The 7th Fleet completed final exercises yesterday. Total available vessels, 1,437 combat units, not including support craft and logistics vessels. The number would have shocked the Galactic Council. Humanity had been quietly building and training for half a century, and their fleet was nearly 5 times larger than anyone suspected. More importantly, every ship had been designed with one specific purpose: to fight and win against superior numbers. Send the response to the Council, Chen ordered. Terra Fleet Command accepts the mission. Provide them with our estimated arrival time at the conflict zone, but don't give them details about fleet composition. Let them be surprised. The message that went out to the Galactic Council was brief. Terra Fleet Command will deploy to assist in defensive operations against Vorthak forces. Estimated arrival in conflict zone, 14 standard galactic days. Recommend all Allied forces maintain current defensive positions until Terra Fleet engagement commences. Admiral Chen commanding. What the message didn't mention was that the human fleet was already moving. While other species spent weeks or months planning and preparing for military deployments, human doctrine emphasized rapid response. The first wave of human ships had left Sol system within hours of receiving the initial request for assistance. The journey to the conflict zone would take 2 weeks, but those 2 weeks would give humanity time to do what it did best: analyze the enemy, adapt tactics, and prepare for every possible scenario. Human war colleges had spent decades studying theoretical conflicts with technologically superior opponents. The Vorthak weren't theoretically superior. They just had bigger ships and more of them. From a human perspective, that was simply another tactical challenge to be solved. As the first human vessels entered hyperspace, their crews settled into the familiar rhythm of pre-combat preparation. Weapons systems were tested and retested. Battle scenarios were run through simulation after simulation. Most importantly, every crew member understood their mission. The Vorthak had made the mistake of threatening innocent civilians, and humanity had a very simple response to bullies. They were about to learn why the universe's newest military power had never lost a fight. Humanity's fleet entered the war zone. Second document. The first sign that something had changed came through the long-range sensor arrays positioned at the edge of the Kepler system. Sensor technician Vralesh of the Aquatic Federation Monitoring Station was reviewing routine scans when her instruments began registering readings that made no sense. According to her displays, there were massive gravitational distortions approaching the system, but the signatures were unlike anything in the galactic databases. "Supervisor Gethmos," she called out in her melodious aquatic language, "I'm detecting unknown contacts entering the system. The readings are unusual." Supervisor Gethmos flowed over to her station, his tentacles rippling with concern. The Kepler system was supposed to be a quiet monitoring post, well behind the front lines of the war with the Vorthak. "Show me the data, technician." The holographic display materialized above their console, showing a three-dimensional representation of local space. What they saw defied their understanding of conventional space travel. Instead of the usual handful of large signatures that indicated a fleet in hyperspace, there were hundreds of smaller contacts moving in perfect formation. The energy readings suggested vessels that were far more massive than their size should have allowed. "This has to be an instrument malfunction," Gethmos muttered, his translator struggling with his rapid speech. "No known species travels in formations this large, and these power signatures are impossible for vessels of this size." But the readings were confirmed by 3 separate sensor arrays. Whatever was approaching the Kepler system was real, and it was unlike anything the galactic community had ever encountered. The formation was moving at speeds that suggested advanced hyperspace capabilities, but more concerning was the perfect coordination. Every ship maintained exact spacing and heading, suggesting a level of tactical discipline that exceeded even the most elite Galactic Council naval units. The contacts began dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, and what the sensors revealed challenged everything the observers thought they knew about space warfare. The ships were smaller than traditional battleships, but they moved with a precision that was almost mechanical. Each vessel maintained perfect formation spacing while conducting what appeared to be systematic reconnaissance sweeps of the entire system. Within minutes, the approaching fleet had cataloged every asteroid, every space station, and every piece of debris larger than a meter in diameter. The scanning patterns were thorough to a degree that bordered on obsessive, as if the newcomers were mapping every possible hiding place or tactical advantage in the system. Broadcasting on all frequencies, announced Communications Officer Pithara from across the monitoring station. They're requesting system traffic control data and current tactical situation reports. The transmission is coming from something called the Terra Fleet Command. They're identifying themselves as human military vessels responding to Galactic Council requests for assistance. Gethmos felt a chill run through his aquatic form. The humans had arrived, and they had brought far more than anyone had expected. The sensor readings were now showing over 400 vessels in the immediate area, with more contacts continuing to drop out of hyperspace in perfectly timed waves. The organizational efficiency was staggering. The lead human vessel was broadcasting identification as the TFS Indomitable, a ship designation that wasn't in any galactic naval registry. When the sensor array finally got a clear reading on the flagship, the technical specifications made Gethmos question his instruments again. The vessel was compact compared to traditional battleships, but its mass readings suggested armor plating nearly twice as thick as anything in the known galaxy. "Supervisor," Vralesh called out urgently, "they're requesting real-time intelligence feeds about Vorthak fleet movements and tactical capabilities. They want everything we have, including classified tactical analyses and battle recordings." "Grant them access to everything," Gethmos decided quickly. "If they're here to help fight the Vorthak, they need to understand what they're facing." What happened next would be studied in military academies for generations. The human fleet received the intelligence data and immediately began what could only be described as a systematic dissection of Vorthak battle tactics. Using processing capabilities that exceeded anything the galactic community possessed, the humans analyzed 17 major battles in less than 3 hours, identifying patterns and weaknesses that had escaped the notice of military experts from 12 different species. The human response was transmitted simultaneously to every Galactic Council monitoring station in the sector. Terra Fleet Command has completed tactical analysis of Vorthak capabilities and strategies. We have identified significant exploitable weaknesses in their operational doctrine. Recommend all Allied forces maintain current defensive positions while Terra Fleet implements tactical solutions. Admiral Chen, commanding. The message was accompanied by detailed tactical assessments that made seasoned galactic military officers rethink everything they thought they knew about space combat. The humans had identified weaknesses that were so obvious in hindsight that several Council military advisors wondered how they had missed them for so long. The Vorthak relied on overwhelming firepower and intimidation. They expected their enemies to retreat when faced with superior numbers and technology. Their formations were designed to maximize the psychological impact of their arrival, spreading terror among defending forces. But the humans had identified a critical flaw. The Vorthak had never faced an enemy that refused to be intimidated. More importantly, Vorthak tactics assumed that their enemies would fight in the same way that most galactic species fought. With caution, with concern for casualties, and with retreat as a viable option when faced with overwhelming odds. The humans appeared to operate under entirely different assumptions. The Terra fleet began moving toward the primary conflict zone with the same mechanical precision they had demonstrated during their arrival. But instead of massing for a single overwhelming assault, they split into smaller task forces that began approaching the Vorthak positions from multiple vectors simultaneously. The tactical display looked like nothing any galactic military expert had ever seen. Most space battles in galactic history followed predictable patterns. Fleets would approach each other, exchange long-range fire, maneuver for tactical advantage, and eventually close for decisive engagement. Casualties were typically light, because most commanders would withdraw their forces when faced with overwhelming opposition. The Vorthak had been successful because they brought overwhelming force to every engagement, forcing their enemies to retreat or face annihilation. The human approach was fundamentally different. Instead of treating space combat as a chess match between opposing commanders, they approached it as a problem to be solved. Their task forces moved with the efficiency of a machine designed for a specific purpose: the complete elimination of enemy capability to continue fighting. Admiral Chen stood in the Combat Information Center of the TFS Indomitable, watching as her fleet implemented the battle plan her staff had developed during the journey to the conflict zone. The plan was complex in its execution, but simple in its concept. Instead of fighting the Vorthak on their terms, humanity would force them to fight on human terms. All task forces report ready for Phase 1 implementation, announced Commander Torres. Long-range reconnaissance confirms Vorthak fleet composition matches intelligence estimates. They've deployed in standard pyramid formation around the Arcturus mining colony, apparently expecting conventional defensive actions from Allied forces. Chen nodded, her attention focused on the three-dimensional tactical display that showed the positions of both human and Vorthak forces. The enemy had arranged themselves in a formation designed to maximize their firepower advantage while minimizing their exposure to counterattack. It was a textbook defensive position that had worked against every previous opponent. The Vorthak are broadcasting surrender demands to the colonial authorities, reported Communications Officer Lieutenant Sarah Kim. Standard intimidation tactics. They're giving the colonists 6 hours to evacuate before they begin systematic destruction of infrastructure. That's their first mistake, Chen observed calmly. They've given us a timeline to work with. Implement Phase 1. All task forces are authorized to engage. What happened next would fundamentally change how galactic civilization understood space warfare. Instead of approaching the Vorthak formation directly, the human task forces began executing coordinated strikes against what appeared to be random targets throughout the system. Isolated Vorthak patrol vessels, communication relays, supply depots, and sensor platforms all came under simultaneous attack. The attacks weren't random at all. Human intelligence analysis had identified the Vorthak command and control network, and the Terra fleet was systematically dismantling it. Each target was struck by precisely the amount of force necessary to eliminate it completely, with no wasted effort or unnecessary destruction. The efficiency was both impressive and terrifying. The Vorthak response was predictable. They attempted to reinforce their threatened assets by dispatching vessels from their main formation. But every time they moved ships to respond to human attacks, they found that the humans had already moved on to different targets. It was as if the human commanders could predict exactly how their enemies would respond to each tactical situation. Within 4 hours, the Vorthak had lost 30% of their support infrastructure and were completely blind beyond their immediate formation. Their communications were being jammed by human electronic warfare capabilities that exceeded anything in the Galactic Technology database. Most critically, they had been forced to scatter their forces in pursuit of human task forces that seemed to vanish whenever the Vorthak concentrated enough firepower to threaten them. Phase 2 is ready for implementation, Torres reported. Vorthak main formation has been isolated and is operating without external intelligence or logistical support. Their commanders are showing signs of tactical confusion. Chen studied the tactical display with satisfaction. The Vorthak had been lured into exactly the situation human doctrine was designed to exploit. Their forces were scattered, their command structure was compromised, and they were operating in an information vacuum. Now it was time for humanity to demonstrate why they had never lost a military engagement. All task forces converge on primary target area, she ordered. Implement Phase 2. Show them what happens when someone threatens innocent civilians in human operational space. Humanity's fleet entered the war zone. Third document. The final phase of the Battle of Arcturus began at exactly 0347 hours Galactic Standard Time, when the scattered human task forces suddenly converged on the main Vorthak formation from 7 different vectors simultaneously. What the Vorthak commanders witnessed in those next few minutes would haunt their species' military doctrine for generations to come. The human approach defied every conventional understanding of space combat tactics. Instead of the cautious, long-range engagement that galactic military tradition demanded, the Terra Fleet ships accelerated directly toward the Vorthak formation at speeds that should have been suicidal. The human vessels were moving so fast that collision seemed inevitable, yet they maintained perfect formation coordination even at velocities that would have torn apart most known spacecraft. Admiral Vorthak Supremus Gralthex watched from the bridge of his flagship as the human ships approached his defensive formation. His 4 arms gestured frantically at the tactical displays while his translator device struggled to keep up with his rapid commands. All vessels concentrate fire on the approaching human formations. These primitives clearly do not understand the futility of direct assault against superior firepower. The Vorthak opened fire with every weapon system they possessed. The space between the fleets became a constellation of energy beams, plasma bolts, and kinetic projectiles that would have vaporized any conventional fleet. The concentrated firepower was enough to sterilize a small planet, yet the human ships continued their impossible approach through the storm of destruction. What happened next defied the Vorthak understanding of physics and engineering. The human vessels didn't attempt to avoid the incoming fire. Instead, they flew directly through it, their defensive systems absorbing or deflecting damage that should have been catastrophic. Explosions blossomed against human hull plating, energy beams scattered off angular armor configurations, and kinetic rounds simply bounced away from surfaces that seemed impossibly resilient. Impossible, Gralthex breathed, his secondary arms clutching the command throne for support. No known technology can withstand that level of concentrated fire. Our weapons should have reduced their fleet to cosmic dust. The human ships continued their approach, and as they drew closer, the true genius of their tactical doctrine became apparent. The Terra Fleet vessels weren't just heavily armored, they were designed specifically to survive exactly this type of engagement. Every angle of their hull plating was calculated to deflect incoming fire. Every system was shielded and redundant. The humans had built their ships to fight at close range against numerically superior opponents. When the human fleet reached optimal firing range, the counterattack began. The Vorthak learned in those first few seconds that human weapons technology had evolved along completely different lines than galactic standard. Instead of focusing on raw power output, human weapons were designed for precision, efficiency, and devastating effect against specific target types. The first salvo of human torpedoes struck the Vorthak flagship's shields with surgical precision. Each weapon was programmed with detailed intelligence about Vorthak defensive systems, and they struck at exactly the points where the shields were most vulnerable. The explosions weren't just random destruction, they were calculated to create cascading system failures that would propagate throughout the enemy vessel's infrastructure. Commander Torres watched the tactical display from his position at the intelligence station aboard the TFS Indomitable. Direct hits on targets Alpha through Delta. Vorthak defensive systems are showing signs of systematic failure. Their shield generators are overloading in sequence exactly as predicted. Admiral Chen nodded with satisfaction. The battle plan was unfolding precisely as her staff had calculated. The Vorthak had made the fundamental error of assuming that all species would fight according to the same basic principles. They had prepared for enemies who would engage at long range, maneuver cautiously, and retreat when faced with superior firepower. They were completely unprepared for an enemy that had designed their entire military doctrine around close-range, high-intensity combat. The human attack wasn't random violence, it was applied engineering. Every weapon strike was calculated to achieve maximum damage to critical systems. Every maneuver was designed to exploit known weaknesses in Vorthak tactical doctrine. The Terra Fleet moved through the enemy formation like a precision instrument, dismantling the Vorthak ships with mechanical efficiency. The psychological impact on the Vorthak crews was devastating. They had spent decades crushing opponents through superior firepower and intimidation. They were accustomed to enemies who fled when faced with overwhelming odds. The humans, not only refused to retreat, but they fought with an intensity that suggested they actually enjoyed close combat. What the Vorthak couldn't understand was that humanity had spent centuries perfecting the art of warfare against technologically superior opponents. Human military history was filled with examples of smaller, more determined forces defeating larger, better-equipped enemies through superior tactics, training, and sheer refusal to surrender. The Terra fleet was simply applying those same principles on an interstellar scale. The battle lasted exactly 47 minutes. When the last Vorthak vessel either surrendered or was disabled, the human fleet had achieved something unprecedented in galactic military history: the complete defeat of a numerically superior force without losing a single vessel. Several human ships had sustained damage, but their redundant systems and over-engineered construction meant that none were mission-killed. The aftermath of the battle sent shockwaves throughout both the Galactic Council and the Vorthak Dominion. Council representatives who had reluctantly agreed to request human assistance found themselves trying to comprehend military capabilities that exceeded their most optimistic projections. The humans hadn't just defeated the Vorthak. They had made it look effortless. More importantly, the tactical recordings of the engagement revealed that humanity possessed military technologies and doctrines that were decades ahead of anything else in known space. The precision of their weapons, the efficiency of their tactics, and the coordination of their fleet movements suggested a level of military sophistication that challenged every assumption about human capabilities. The Vorthak response to their defeat was immediate and predictable. Within hours of the battle's conclusion, Vorthak High Command was broadcasting surrender overtures to the Galactic Council. The species that had spent years systematically conquering and terrorizing the galaxy suddenly found themselves facing an opponent they couldn't intimidate, couldn't outfight, and couldn't understand. The surrender negotiations were brief and decisive. The Vorthak agreed to withdraw from all occupied territories, pay reparations to the species they had displaced, and submit to galactic monitoring of their military activities. The terms were harsh but fair, and they were accepted without argument by a species that had suddenly discovered they were no longer the most dangerous military force in the galaxy. Admiral Chen stood in the observation deck of the TFS Indomitable, watching as the last Vorthak vessels jumped to hyperspace to begin their long journey back to their home territory. The war that had threatened to consume galactic civilization was over, ended not by negotiation or compromise, but by the simple demonstration that bullies could be stopped when faced with superior determination and capability. Admiral, Commander Torres approached with a data pad containing preliminary battle assessment reports. Fleet Command is requesting a comprehensive analysis of the engagement for transmission to Earth. They want to understand how our tactical projections compared to actual combat performance. Chen accepted the data pad and reviewed the preliminary statistics. The numbers were impressive. 0 human casualties, minimal ship damage, complete tactical objectives achieved within acceptable time parameters. More importantly, the engagement had served as a field test for human military capabilities under actual combat conditions. The results would inform military planning for decades to come. Tell Fleet Command that the Terra fleet performed exactly as designed, she replied. Human engineering, human tactics, and human determination proved sufficient to resolve the immediate threat to galactic stability. Recommend continued monitoring of regional military balance to prevent future destabilization. The message that went back to Earth was more than just a battle report. It was confirmation that humanity had successfully transitioned from a regional power to a galactic military force capable of maintaining interstellar peace through strength. The Terra fleet had proven that human military doctrine could scale up to meet any challenge, regardless of the technological capabilities or numerical advantages of potential opponents. Within weeks, requests for human military assistance began arriving from species throughout the galaxy. Pirates, raiders, and various aggressive factions that had previously operated with impunity suddenly found themselves facing the possibility of human intervention. The mere threat of Terra fleet deployment was often sufficient to resolve conflicts that had persisted for years. The Galactic Council formally requested that humanity establish a permanent peacekeeping presence in the galaxy, with authority to respond to threats against civilian populations. The request came with offers of territorial concessions, technological exchanges, and formal recognition of human military supremacy in matters of galactic security. Humanity's response was characteristically direct. They accepted the responsibility, but only on their own terms. Human peacekeeping forces would operate under human command, using human tactics and technology. They would respond to threats as they saw fit, without interference from council bureaucracy. Most importantly, they would maintain the capability to escalate their response to whatever level was necessary to protect innocent civilians. The galaxy had learned an important lesson. Humanity was no longer the curious newcomer species that had stumbled onto the galactic stage with primitive technology and strange customs. They were now the apex predator of known space, and they had demonstrated their willingness to use that capability to maintain peace through superior firepower. The Vorthak defeat marked the beginning of what historians would later call the Pax Humana, a period of unprecedented galactic peace maintained through the simple understanding that humanity would not tolerate aggression against civilian populations. Species that had spent millennia perfecting the art of warfare suddenly found themselves learning the art of diplomacy because the alternative was facing the Terra fleet in combat. And in the deep reaches of space, human shipyards continued their quiet work, building vessels designed for challenges not yet imagined, because humanity had learned the fundamental lesson of survival in a hostile universe. If you want peace, prepare for war, and if war comes anyway, make sure you're the most dangerous thing in the galaxy.